The Biden administration is enforcing immigration laws.
Enforcement alone cannot fix our immigration system. Razor wire.
Packing classrooms with non-English speaking students.
Skyrocketing and blowing off that number.
So you don't know that part of the law? Diseases that are coming from outside of America.
Which is what the Democrats love to do, is to conflate.
Mr. Chairman, are we having a colloquy? Because I'm happy to engage in it, but I had a unanimous consent request.
I just want to clarify.
I want to clarify.
Asylum is a very
So why do you want all
complex
these
process
judges then? If they cannot adjudicate immediately, why do they want them? Because
I see
cartels
you
are
need to be able
abusing
to
the
do that.
system. I yield
Yes,
back.
I'm willing to help pay for some of the buses to send more and more to these welcoming cities, these sanctuary cities. They're all a little grumpy.
Just on a little treadmill.
It's child.
Does it make our communities safer by making it all but impossible to deport criminal illegal aliens? How does it help working families by flooding the labor market with cheap illegal labor? How does it improve our schools by packing classrooms with non-English speaking students? I am still waiting for an answer to these questions from the Democrats.
There is so much fear-mongering going on that it is difficult to know exactly where to start. But let me say this. First, the Biden administration is enforcing immigration laws. In fact, the administration has been so heavy-handed in recent months that I have serious concerns about how they are conducting border enforcement. Undocumented immigrants pay an estimated $7 billion in sales and excise taxes, $3.6 billion in property taxes, and $1.1 billion in personal income taxes every year. In 2019 alone, Mexican undocumented households contributed nearly $9 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. And that same year, undocumented Mexican workers contributed $14.5 billion to Social Security and Medicare through the taxes taken out of their paychecks, which means that they contributed billions of dollars to entitlement programs that American citizens have the access to, but those undocumented immigrants have no ability to benefit from.
Real solutions require compromise, and MAGA Republicans aren't interested in compromise. Real solutions rarely get you hits on Fox News or Newsmax, and they won't get you Donald Trump's endorsement. Enforcement alone cannot fix our immigration system. We know this because that approach has largely failed for 3 decades. People didn't stop coming when President Trump and Stephen Miller imposed the cruelest immigration policies imaginable. They didn't stop coming when Governor Abbott lined the Rio Grande with deadly buoys covered in razor wire.
Some reports put the cost for this surge for the city of Eagle Pass at $2.2 million since mid-September. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds a little over.
Okay.
I would put it at probably half of that amount
Okay.
because it fluctuates.
Okay, so $1 million since mid-September on the costs that affect Eagle Pass. But that's $1 million directly as a consequence of that surge is being absorbed by the folks in Eagle Pass.
Yes, sir.
Since September. And so a question here is, with all of this, has the federal government reimbursed your agency for any of these costs meaningfully?
No, sir.
Okay, not at all. Well, thank you for that, and I'm sorry that we're not doing a better job to make sure that you all can do your job without getting overwhelmed. Mr. Camarota, let me just ask a couple quick questions. As of October 2023, the foreign-born population in the United States is 49.5 million people. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or about 15% of the United States population. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that not at roughly the highest levels we've ever had? Or, it's been there once or twice before, but now we're eclipsing it.
Yes, the top was 1890 at 14.8%. America has never been here before, and of course we're headed into uncharted territory in terms of the foreign-born share of the U.S. population.
Right, this population has grown the foreign-born population by 4.5 million under President Biden. So in other words, that 49.5 million is skyrocketing and blowing off that number, correct?
Right, I mean, if this were to continue, again, we just would set new records every month.
The interesting thing about parole is this. Over the last 25 years before the Biden administration, parole was administered on average 15 times a year. The statute is very clear. It's meant to be a particularized, individualized program, and that is exactly what Secretary Mayorkas confessed and admitted was the purpose of parole when he testified. Yet in the last 18 months, over 1 million people have received parole status. You want to know what draws people to the border? It is catch and release programs like parole. Of your 5 ambulances, you dedicate one almost every day solely to dealing with illegal migrants. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And occasionally you have to go beyond 1 and 2 and maybe more.
Of course. Yes, sir.
And that imposes constraints on how you service legal residents of your service area.
Sometimes our residents are left without an ambulance service.
Since the spring of 2022, Governor Abbott of Texas has bused over 90,000 asylum seekers to cities across the United States, sending approximately 1/3 of them to New York City. He has done this without any coordination with the receiving cities. You touched on this in your opening statement. In fact, just yesterday, a CBS article highlighted how Texas sabotaged efforts by nonprofits to create a more orderly system. I'd like to submit that article for the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Chen, how does this lack of coordination make it harder for nonprofits and cities to help welcome and integrate migrants into their communities?
Thank you for the question. I think the main issue here is the surprise factor. When unannounced buses are coming at different times, sometimes late at night, and the welcoming cities or service providers are not aware when they're going to come, it's just going to make it more difficult for a shelter to make sure there's adequate bed space, for other service providers providing perhaps emergency medical care or other needs. It's going to be much more challenging for them. And that's why there need to be better coordination and support from the federal government, like the Shelter and Services Program that provides assistance to fund local provision of services.
How many migrant students are in the New York public school system this school year? New migrant students are in the system.
I don't have that specific number. What I can tell is that in my district, I believe the last number was around 5,000. My district, it's 2/3 of Manhattan. And we have, in my district, we have a lot of the hotel rooms that are being used for as shelters and where families are prioritized. So we have a disproportionate number of families as in the shelters because, of course,
the comptroller in your testimony, you have a quote from the comptroller, and he says 12,000 migrant students in the New York City public schools since June 30th. Is that an accurate number in your judgment?
I believe so, yes.
12,000 new students brought into the schools in just the last 7 months. That seems to be. Yep. Do you have children in the New York public schools?
I do have.
Have you seen an impact with your kids and the type of education they're getting?
What I have seen is an impact in the entire district. So from the buses that are running late, I think particularly just principals are very concerned because they never know when they're going to get new students. And I am the founding board chair of a charter school in Brooklyn that was specifically designed for students who don't speak English. I know how much it takes to teach children who don't speak English at home, like my kids, to learn English. It's very specifically designed work. You need qualified teachers, and even if we have the resources, there are just not enough ESL qualified teachers in New York City to be hired. The other thing that I think is very important is the safety issue, because this is the #1 thing that I hear from parents in my community. They want more school safety agents in their buildings. There is a lack of school safety agents, and the fact that Mayor Adams had to cancel this class, which I can't tell you how desperately needed it is. We have had, after COVID, dramatic increase in bullying and violence in our schools. I'm the chair of the school safety committee, so I hear the most extreme cases in my district of kids who are getting a safety transfer, where they want to go to another school because they don't feel safe. And the #1 thing that we want is more school safety agents. And this has been cut, and he said that now parents will have to volunteer, which we are not qualified to be school safety agents.
When it comes to asylum seekers, Mr. Camarota, you talked about the U.S. being in unprecedented territory. 20% of our population now, foreign-born. Unprecedented. It used to be like 19. Now it's 20%. 100 years ago it was 19.
It was 14.8 is the peak in 1890.
The numbers I saw was, well, okay, we'll buy your numbers. Are some of those immigrants participating in our nation's military?
You're talking about the whole foreign-born. There should be no illegal immigrants in the military.
They can't be, but a lot of green
legal
card
immigrants
holders are part of our military.
Absolutely.
And a lot of undocumented immigrants want to join the military and they can't. So the fact that you have such a high number doesn't mean it's bad for the U.S. I bet you if those undocumented could, they would join the military and they would be true Americans.
And isn't it a requirement in federal law that you have to consult and coordinate with states and local municipalities from the federal level? Isn't that correct?
I'm not sure about that.
So you don't know that part of the law? Is that it?
I just don't know that specific question.
Yeah, okay. Because it is required to do that, and it's currently not going on by organizations like World Relief and others in my home state of Wisconsin, where they're not coordinating, they're not working with local municipalities, and very unfortunate.
If I may comment, sir, my understanding is many of the federal refugee organizations that work with the federal government are typically in very close coordination with all the state agencies that support that. It's a state, local, and federal partnership with local providers like World Relief that you mentioned. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't that kind of coordination. So that's an area that perhaps could be worked on.
You're about to be surprised because maybe they're talking to the state, but the federal and state is not talking to local municipalities. In fact, they excluded Chippewa County from those discussions in bringing refugees to western Wisconsin. You said remove those who are not eligible in a safe and humane manner. That's part of your, just a small segment of some of your testimony. Remove those who are not eligible in a safe and humane manner. Can you give me an example of somebody you believe should be removed?
So we have a very thorough immigration law process that begins with asylum seekers, for example, if they are going to seek relief.
Give me a specific example of somebody that you think should be removed.
If there is a full...
I'm going to move on to the next question. Should everyone get an attorney? That's what I heard in your testimony. Anyone that comes to our border, they should get an attorney. Is that right?
So legal representation has been shown to greatly improve both the fairness of the system and the efficiency. If you have a lawyer
So the American taxpayers should pay for the lawyers also. Not only should they pay for the hospitals, not only should they pay for the schools, not only should they pay the SNAP benefits, they should also pay for the lawyers to allow them as people from outside the United States to be able to come into America.
It makes the system work much more efficiently if a judge doesn't have to explain to an individual that's appearing in front of the judge what the legal process is. It'll make the entire process more efficient. And that's what we are about here, is making sure the system is more efficient, fair, and orderly. That will help improve the processing.
Yeah, is it ever fair?
That's what we're all about.
Is it ever fair at this point? Are there many parents that you're working with that are really concerned about public health issues? We're hearing about diseases that are coming from outside of America to places like New York City. Are you hearing those concerns?
There was one specific outbreak of varicella in my district last year. So the city health commissioner sent a letter to all health officials in New York City saying that the vaccination rates in the countries that are sending immigrants here is much lower than in the US. So there is this concern. I think the biggest problem is the double standards. My community were just blocked from entering school buildings for 2 years if you didn't have the COVID vaccine. Students couldn't play sports, even outside if they didn't have the COVID vaccine. Like parents who couldn't take the COVID vaccines for health reasons, not even ideological health reasons, couldn't see their children's graduation. And then now suddenly, anybody who arrived can get in without any vaccine, with vaccines that we have decades of data. I think there is a problem of trust now in terms of the double standards. We just went through so many rules. I'm sorry.
No, thank you very much. I yield back the double standard, Mr. Chairman.
A report by Forward US, The Positive Economic Impact of Immigration. A report by the University of Pennsylvania Wharton Business School, The Effects of Immigration on the U.S. Economy. And a report by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Immigrants contribute greatly to the U.S. economy despite the Trump administration's public charge rule rationale.
Just for clarification, those are reports on immigrants, not illegal immigrants.
These are reports on immigrants and the economic benefits of immigration, which include documented and undocumented immigrants.
Right, which is what the Democrats love to do, is to conflate.
Mr. Chairman, are we having
conflate
a
the two.
colloquy? Because I'm happy
No,
to
I just
engage in
wanna-
it, but I had a
no,
unanimous consent request.
I just want to clarify.
I want to
what's in these
clarify
reports.
that
I appreciate
undocumented
that.
immigrants and documented immigrants contribute to the U.S.
And I wanted
economy,
to
and
note-
any indications that they do not is excluding the contributions of undocumented immigrants as well as documented
And I just
immigrants.
wanted to be clear that you're confusing the two. Thank you.
I'm not confusing the two, Mr. Chairman. I'm
including.
including both because both contribute.
Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the unanimous consent request is approved.
Do you believe, Ms. Egorov, that what is happening right now it actually hurts legitimate asylum seekers, legitimate people avoiding persecution or have refugees or try to come here to contribute to society? What are your thoughts on that?
I think absolutely. The problem is that the vast majority of refugees that have been vetted by the United Nations are women and children from just 3 countries, right? Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan. This is not the same population that we're seeing coming through the southern border. So we're not accepting the most vulnerable refugees. Based on public data that I found in New York City, 80% of the new migrants in New York City are single adults. And if 50% of the refugees are women and children, there is a disconnect. We are not, the most vulnerable cannot even make the cross in the southern border because it's very dangerous. And so the most vulnerable will never be able to cross the border.
Yeah, and that is a challenge. And I actually just went to the border and was always, had mostly the adult males who were going there. But Mr. Chen, you talk about substance, processing at the border. Would you agree that we should have immediately determined, regardless how we believe in asylum standard, determination right at the border and deny an entry with people that illegitimately applying for asylum? Would you support adjudication and denying an entry immediately at the border?
So thank you for the question. I don't think that would be practically possible to make a determination for asylum so quickly. Asylum is a very
So why do you want all
complex
these
process
judges then? If they cannot adjudicate immediately, why do they want them? Just to provide more papers and wait more years? Why do you even, if you cannot do that, what's the point of you wanting to have more judges if you cannot have immediate adjudication?
So there aren't judges typically sitting at the border region to be able to...
Yeah, but you say we need to have more. So what would they be doing there? Just giving more papers? Or what would they be doing if they're not adjudicated and immediately deciding if entry would be allowed? What are they for there?
So I think we completely agree here about the importance of having an efficient and orderly process that quickly can screen people like asylum seekers for eligibility. The question is just how do you do that operationally to make it effective?
But you would not disagree that we should have immediately adjudication and making decision at the border, regardless how we feel about the standard, because HR 2 increases standard, and it's actually a reasonable standard. More likely than not, it's still 50-50 standard, so it's a pretty still high standard, considering, how many people abusing the system, and legitimate asylum seekers actually truly can be prosecuted and killed by their government have a hard time now because there is no prioritization. So you think that should be happening at the border and we should deny an entry?
So what I don't think would work is, I think you used the word immediately a couple of times. It takes time for an asylum seeker to understand and explain his or her case to an asylum officer.
But it's okay, maybe that will time, but they would not be allowed an entry in the United States, right? So they can stay, in the detention facilities, but ultimately they would not be given notice to appear and go in the country. Is that correct? You agree with that?
I'm not, that is the process right now, is that somebody who's seeking...
No, now they're releasing, because they don't have ability. We're so overwhelmed. But you said cartels, if we have that, would actually be preyed upon people. But aren't they preying upon people right now? Have you been at the border and see what's happening? The situation now, you believe they're not preyed upon by cartels, and it's huge. People, women and children, and we have people pretty much being abused.
I have been to the border, and people who are seeking asylum, people who are here waiting at the border. I was just in the Nogales port this fall. People are waiting for weeks, sleeping at those turnstiles to be able to gain entry because there aren't enough capacity.
Because
by
cartels
CBP
are
to be able
abusing
to
the
do that.
system. I
And
yield
yes,
back. My
cartels
time is
are-
expired, and using them the pawns.
If I could just expand my
At the
answer a little
request
bit.
of the minority, Ms. Ross is next.
The ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, was here earlier. His testimony, he stated that Governor Abbott has sent, from Texas, has sent 80,000 of these illegal immigrants to New York on buses. I personally think that's a beautiful thing. I think it should be 180,000. Matter of fact, I'm willing to help pay for some of the buses to send more and more to these welcoming cities, these sanctuary cities. Mayor Adams now says he's overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed. Other cities, Chicago, we're overwhelmed. Heck, we send not even 100 or so to Martha's Vineyard. We got to call the police. We got a crisis. Texas, the counties in Texas, those municipalities along the southern border have been overwhelmed for the past 3 years, and you heard nothing from the Democrats. Nothing. It's all okay. It's not my problem. I'm up there in the cushy East Coast. So they start busing them up there. It's a beautiful thing. And now the American people are paying attention. They're paying attention to the Biden border crisis. The Democrats didn't care. They didn't care about the border crisis for the last 3 years of this administration. And now they care. Really, folks? Really? Do you think the Democrats truly care? I find the timing of it interesting. We are 10 months away from a general election. Joe's approval rating is in the toilet. It's 33%. You can get online and look at all these residents of all these large cities, New York, Chicago. They're all a little grumpy. They're a little grumpy. They're saying, Mayor, what the hell's happening to our city here? And they're paying attention. The ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, was here earlier. His testimony, he stated that Governor Abbott has sent, from Texas, has sent 80,000 of these illegal immigrants to New York on buses. I personally think that's a beautiful thing. I think it should be 180,000. Matter of fact, I'm willing to help pay for some of the buses to send more and more to these welcoming cities, these sanctuary cities. Mayor Adams now says he's overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed. Other cities, Chicago, we're overwhelmed. Heck, we send not even 100 or so to Martha's Vineyard. We got to call the police. We got a crisis. Texas, the counties in Texas, those municipalities along the southern border have been overwhelmed for the past 3 years, and you heard nothing from the Democrats. Nothing. It's all okay. It's not my problem. I'm up there in the cushy East Coast. So they start busing them up there. It's a beautiful thing. And now the American people are paying attention. They're paying attention to the Biden border crisis. The Democrats didn't care. They didn't care about the border crisis for the last 3 years of this administration. And now they care. Really, folks? Really? Do you think the Democrats truly care? I find the timing of it interesting. We are 10 months away from a general election. Joe's approval rating is in the toilet. It's 33%. You can get online and look at all these residents of all these large cities, New York, Chicago.
Our social services programs have been negatively affected by the rise of migrants. Taxpayers have footed the bill for illegal immigrants by shelling out over $150 billion of their hard-earned money. I saw firsthand at the border, hospitals are overflowed. American citizens have to travel for hours to get their medical needs met because the local hospitals could not take them. Whether it be your doctor's appointments, your kids' teachers being stretched thin, you can bet that they have been negatively impacted by the illegal immigration. One of the things I found interesting, and as we were traveling in Yuma, Arizona, is the hospitals. The young people, the young ladies would come right across the border and have a baby. And then by federal law, the hospitals had to provide the car seats before they could send them on their way. So we're not doing anything to secure the U.S. southern border. Chief, I know you'd like to have the additional money, But wouldn't you rather us do some things to kind of slow the flow from other countries? I mean, we had 106 different nations come through Yuma, Arizona, according to Sheriff Daniels. Wouldn't you rather us do something besides send money? It's like setting a house on fire and then funding the fire department. I don't quite understand the benefit of extra money while we're setting a place on fire. So, Chief, would you rather us just secure the border and stop this flow of immigrants from all over the globe? 302,000 last month, I think, came here. Wouldn't that be better than just sending a little money?
Yes, sir.
I think not only just for you, sir, but the people that are dying 150 a day that are dying of fentanyl poisoning. I think it'd be better for those families as well. Or the displaced American citizens that we're now kicking out of school systems. There's a lot of things we can do instead of just funding the failure of this Department of Homeland Security and this executive branch that we've got that have created this issue. Sheriff Daniels said in here in testimony in 2018, or he said he'd been there 40 years on the border. Never had he seen it as good as it was in 2018, and never as bad as it is right now, and that was before last month. And so there are a lot of things. It's always government. We want to throw more money at the problem. We create the problem, we set the building on fire, and then we fund the fire department. That's kind of the way I see this. When you say some pretty extreme situations, or can you elaborate a little bit on what we're looking at?
I can give you anecdotal data about my district. I believe just last month there was a 10-year-old in a shelter who committed suicide. We don't know what that boy went through crossing the border, right? But I think that, the federal government has provided us data. In my testimony, I refer to the 2019 report that specifically says how children are being raped, are being child trafficked, there's sexual violence, sexual trafficking, and literally there are, if you look in the internet, there are videos of children who have been medicated, who are not even, conscious, being used to cross the border. And there are many cases in that report of the Homeland Security as well, of children who are being used. They literally come, help an adult get into the U.S., and they are sent back to help another adult.
They're like on a treadmill. They come over,
Yes.
they identify as the student or the child of this individual adult. Then they grab the child, once the adult's here, send them back across the border,
Yes.
and they're basically they're just on a little treadmill.
It's child trafficking, and we have known that for many years because there is a report from the
Sure.
Department of Homeland Security.
My time's up. Thank you. Thank you.
You've all seen the TSA check line, of course. Well, I have news for you. Biden's DHS has created another line, and here is the picture to prove it. This is a line in the Tucson airport, specially made for non-citizens. And as you can see, the sign says, non-U.S. citizens without passports enter here. And without passports, that, just tip of the iceberg, these illegal immigrants may go unvetted with no verifiable photo ID at all. And I guess Biden and Mayorkas want us all to trust that these people are going to say who they are based on just their honesty and their word alone. You know what a valid form of ID is for an illegal alien according to TSA today? An arrest warrant. I'm not making that up. You could get on a plane with an arrest warrant. And if an arrest warrant can get an illegal alien on a domestic flight, then why can't it get them a one-way ticket to jail where they belong? This is not only an assault on an American citizen, but a grave threat to our national security. If you want another 9/11 in this country, keep the border wide open. And I suggest that we don't. I yield back the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
How do you feel when you hear your family's law-abiding behavior compared with that of illegal immigrants?
What I want is to make sure that my kids have the same opportunities that we had here to work and to study. We need to have some kind of process to prioritize who's coming to our country. And I think it should be
and observe,
and contribute to legal process, yes.
Yeah, and observe the rule of law as your family.
Yes, absolutely. And with
I've
some
gotta
vetting
move on.
process. There is no vetting now.
Dr. Camarota, your studies entirely are on illegal immigrants. And what you have done is to take with extensive studies, the cost of the services demanded by those illegal immigrants compared to the taxes that they pay. Am I correct on this?
Yes, we have an estimate for that, yes.
And that estimate is $68,000 net cost to U.S. taxpayers per illegal immigrant. Is that correct?
That's the lifetime net fiscal drain, yes.
Right. Now we've had 5 million illegal immigrants enter this country and be released into it. 3.3 million deliberately released, another 1.7 million gotaways. That's 5 million total. Now, according to my figures, that is a staggering $340 billion a year of net costs to the American people.
Yeah, just to be clear, that's a lifetime cost.
Right.
And that would assume that the educational attainment, that's the key thing. Legal immigrants are much more educated than illegal immigrants.
Of course.
And that's what drives the cost estimate, not illegality or anything like that. It's the same reason, just to give you an example, why cities and states worry so much about losing their middle-class tax base.
Let's just finish the math here. Gallup, 2 years ago, estimated from their surveys there are 42 million people living in poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean who intend to come here now that they can. That comes to more than $2.8 trillion of costs to U.S. taxpayers, and that's just for immigration from Latin America and from the Caribbean. These are staggering numbers, and I thank you for your studies on this. Chief Mello, when we were at Eagle Pass last week, we were told that 1,700 migrants have perished just on American soil during this administration since it took office. No one knows how many have perished south of the border. What have you encountered, and what can you describe that it means to perish in the Texas desert?
Can you repeat that question, sir?
What have you encountered in terms of people perishing, migrants perishing on American soil?
I've encountered several out in the field. What we call the field is the ranches, out in the ranches in the summertime. All along the year, we saw 43 drownings in the Rio Grande. That's not counting on the Mexican side, just Eagle Pass picking up migrants.
Do you think that many of these people would have made this dangerous trek if they knew they'd be turned back at the border?
When we've picked them up, they regret making that trek.
But they made it because they knew they'd be admitted into the country, did they not?
Yes, sir.
The Democrats' witness says we simply need more money to process people into the country faster, allow them to stay, and provide even more free services to support them. Will this reduce illegal immigration or increase it?
I think it'll increase it.
And we need immigrants in this country. Forget the fact that the farm, that our vegetables would rot in the ground if they weren't being picked by many immigrants, many illegal immigrants. The fact is that the birth rate in this country is way below replacement level, which means our population is going to start shrinking. And the ratio of people on Social Security and Medicare is going to increase relative to the number of people supporting them.
Again, thank you for making the trip here today. Thank you for your expert testimony. This will conclude today's hearing. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And without objection, the hearing is adjourned.